Randy, welcome back. How's your mom?
Um, I just went across the way and did a full diaper change and got back that quick. How's that for timing?
Oh my gosh, you're a wonderful son.
Yes,
So great that you can.
she hasn't eaten now this is day 6.
Oh, Randy.
Yeah, so I think we're down to the final hours right now.
Oh, Randy, I'm so sorry. We're all
Oh,
still
no,
sorry,
it's been passing will be a gift for her.
Yeah, and what a special time that you get to spend with her, that you're actually with her so close by. That's really a
Oh, yeah.
generous gift from you and for you. Anyway, welcome back.
Thank you.
You can start anytime you're ready.
Okay. Swallowed some water.
You know, one thing I really like about our talks today is, we do have several fairly new beekeepers, and if we've done anything right today, we've certainly convinced folks that Varroa management is an important part of being a beekeeper, not just a beehaver. And I'll just tell you, in some of our local bee groups, when we talk to folks that don't necessarily attend on, the big meetings like this, they're just beekeepers who come to a local meeting. We ask them, they say, my bees didn't make it. And I swear 9 out of 10 times we say, did you check for mites? Did you treat for mites? And the answer is almost always no. So hopefully for some of our new beekeepers, we've certainly left them with a message as to how important this is. And your work around Varroa management is just top notch. You're probably the premier guy in the country doing this kind of work. It amazes me that you have these hives with mite counts of 25 to 100, not 2 or 3. So anyway, let's get on with it. And thanks again for sticking with us all day.
Oh, you bet. No, it's been very interesting. Yeah, that's always the same question we ask. We sell 1,000 nucleus colonies every spring, and that's tough for us to. We've actually refused to sell colonies to some people who say they're going to refuse to treat because we have these beautiful young queens we've raised, these new colonies. We feel like parents for every one of those 1,000 nukes that we produce, and we don't want to send them off to somebody who's just going to let them die this ugly death from Varroa. I did have one thing to say about, I know if Tina is still listening now, about the feeding of pollen sub in the fall, and she cited one of Heather Matala's studies. And thing to keep in mind is that the studies that Heather did, and I've corresponded extensively with her and Gardotis, is they were in an area where there was an ongoing pollen flow at the time. And that's very different than some other areas. So here in California, where in the fall, we don't have an ongoing pollen flow, preparing your colonies for winter to develop the winter bees and the winter cluster, feeding pollen sub can make a huge difference. I'm in the middle of publishing a bunch of data on that, but I have very strong experimental data for the cost benefit ratio of feeding pollen sub to prepare your winter clusters. Okay, so let me move on to this here, Varroa management. And this is, every year I'm changing my PowerPoints on this. So this is the current version here. Excuse me. And beekeeping used to be much easier. You just got a box of bees from the Sears catalog, and you put the box together, order your bees through Sears catalog, dump the package in, and you could walk away from your hive for years, and it would be just fine. You pull some honey every year. That's no longer the case. And what people may not realize is that there's an analogy with what's happening in the human population right now. We're undergoing a pandemic from a novel virus for our species, and this coronavirus pandemic is affecting humans. When Varroa invaded the United States, it kicked off another pandemic in the bees. And that was a pandemic from a different virus, from deformed wing virus, which had already been there in the bees, but it was always considered to be a benign virus. And it still is a relatively benign virus without the Varroa mite. It's transmitted transovarially via the queens. The virions stick to the outside of the egg as they go down the oviduct. And so most worker bees, and queen bees and drones, with bees, when they emerge from the egg casing and then they devour the egg casing, they're exposed to deforming virus, and it starts to replicate in their body. Their immune system ramps up if they have enough protein in their diet, and they're able to largely suppress the deformed wing virus. So relatively benign virus, as long as the mite's not involved. Once the mite becomes involved, then you start having much, much higher titers of the virus in the bees' bodies, and ultimately many of them emerging with a sign of the virus, these deformed wings. But that doesn't mean that they have to show deformed wings to be seriously impaired. And it very much, as some of the other speakers talked about, the effect on the hemolymph and immune system of the bees. So yeah, so deformed wings, yes, but early on when deforming virus really evolved to take advantage of the mite, we would see signs of deformed wing early on. Nowadays, you may not see much deformed wing, but you'll start seeing the virus affecting the pupae and the larvae before that. So you'll start seeing them like here affecting them. And then I showed these photos earlier. You get this parasitic mite syndrome. So let's just skip through that. Okay, what I've done now is I put this PowerPoint presentation together with just a number of concepts to grasp for Varroa management. Rather than telling you or suggesting what you should do, I'm just telling you the concepts that you should understand in order to plan a Varroa management strategy for your colonies. And I'm very much in line with Jennifer there, that yes, there are some colonies that can manage the mites by themselves, but if you've bought commercial packages, don't count on them managing mites in any way, shape, or form. And most commercial queens sold these days, their offspring are unable to manage the mites. If you're working with a feral stock, that's a possibility. But most stock nowadays has very little resistance to Varroa. So your first concept is what you're doing with Varroa management is controlling the vector of deforming wing virus, also the paralytic viruses. So just as with malaria, you don't have to actually deal with the malaria the protozoan to stop an epidemic. You just have to deal with the vector. And there's a lot of work going on right now. I'm working with some Israeli startup on the vector management of mosquito suppression. If you suppress the vector, you can control the epidemic. And it's the same thing in the bees. You deal with the vector, which is Varroa, to stop the epidemic of the virus. And I showed this graph earlier also, so I don't have to repeat this. Okay, let's get down to actually managing the mite. So in general, in agriculture, you use a integrated pest management pyramid. And this would be the one for Varroa. You start with cultural or biological methods, which would be resistant stock. And we're working on that. I'll cover that. Then you look at physical, mechanical, and biotechnical methods, which I will also show. And then the monitoring of the mite level, again, shown very well by Jennifer. Moving up then to the biopesticides, which is what she is working on right now. And you could probably call thymol and oxalic acid, formic acid biopesticides. And then the last thing that you would use as a last resort would be synthetic chemicals. Unfortunately, when Varroa arrived in most countries, not all, but in most countries, we just skipped all these steps and went right to the synthetic chemicals. In South Africa, they did not. They didn't go to the synthetic chemicals, and within 6 years, all their bees were resistant to Varroa. And that would have happened most likely here also if we had not just skipped ahead. So we've created our own, prolonged our own agony for close to 20 years more than what we've needed to by depending heavily on the synthetic chemicals. So Varroa management concept. Eventually, we're all going to be using resistant bee stock and biotechnical methods as our base. So we maybe something like the metarhizium a couple of times a year, or an oxalic acid treatment once or twice a year may be all that we need to use. So I'm going to start off with selective breeding for Varroa resistance. And this is, of course, our eventual goal. One day, we're going to have bees that can manage the mite by themselves. I know Melanie has worked on this. We're working on this very much ourselves. If you're very interested in this, I copied down this title right here from my Van Elfen. Really good review of the different ways that the mites, our bees can come up to deal with the mite. And hang on a second, let me make sure it's not my son calling. Turn this off. There we go. And they come up with ways that we never in our wildest dreams would have thought of. The bees actually are coming up by our natural selections, coming up with molecular biology against the mite. But there's just fascinating ways they can do that. So for us to tell the bees how to do the job, I think is limiting very, very much what we can do. One of the Dr. Stephen Martin has found when he studied populations throughout the world of resistant bees, naturally resistant bees, is this uncapping, recapping behavior is found universally. And I'm seeing this a lot in my operation too. So for our selective breeding programs, many researchers started off telling the bees exactly how they had to do the job. So they select for grooming behavior, or they select for Varroa sensitive hygiene, or for freeze-killed hygiene. But really, Harbaugh and Harris back in 1999 told us the easiest way. You simply compare the growth of mite populations in each colony and see which ones are more resistant. And so that's what I've been doing for the last several years in California, walking the walk and as an experiment, just to see how hard this would be for Joe commercial beekeeper who can devote 1,000 hives minimum each year for a selective breeding program. Understand, you're not going to do it with 5 hives or 10 hives. That's just, you can't control the drone population. For anybody to get serious, you're talking about putting 500, 1,000 hives minimum into a selective breeding program. What we do is we do this simple thing. We have a Varroa race. We start with nukes early in the season at low mite levels, let them build up for a couple of brood cycles for the worker bees to become offspring of the new queen. And then we do a mite wash. We use Dawn detergent now. We like it much better than alcohol, and it's way more accurate than the powdered sugar. So typically mid-June to early July, we do our first test. And at this point, anybody who's got a mite count above 1, and in many yards above 0, they're out of the program and they get treated. The ones that don't need the treatment, they get a paper tag on top with their mite count written on there, and they stay in the same yard. So they don't get any special treatment. They just don't get any mite treatment. Then a month or 2 later, we'll do a second test. If the mite counts have gone up, then they're removed from the breeder pool or yank off the tag and treat them. And then, but we don't treat these. And so we start narrowing down considerably out of the 1,000 originally. We're down usually to a few hundred by November. And then by the time we choose our breeders the next spring, we're down to a much smaller number. Except the year before last, we had over 150 that did not need any treatment for the entire year. But usually it's somewhere around 25 to 50 that we're getting. And this is what we want. We want these colonies that just get 0 after 0. They just laugh at Varroa mite. You can put them in a yard with huge mite immigration coming from outside, and they just laugh at it. Dr. John Kefas calls them the Varroa black holes. The mites go in, but they just disappear. And we're not seeing any trade-off, negative trade-off in our operation. Big, beautiful brood patterns. You notice the extra spottiness in the brood pattern, the extra holes. This may be the result of some kind of hygienic behavior. We don't usually see much, but I notice in some of our most resistant colonies, we see more of these empty holes than we see in the non-resistant ones. These are very, very gentle bees. We work bees in shorts and t-shirts, no gloves, no veils, most of the year. So anybody that is at all spicy is out of the program. And they're often the most productive, honey productive colonies in the yard, so that we don't see any trade-off for having resistant colonies. Perhaps because when they have such low Varroa levels, they can be more productive. And our percentage of our operation we started off with way fewer than 1% of the hives made it the first year. We got up to around 7%. I'm not sure about this right here. Because of our very strong selective pressure, we weren't accepting anybody that had a mite count of 0. And I think maybe we were being a little bit too strong early on. We're selecting for the 2022 breeders right now. And we have whole yards where every damn colony has a mite count of 0. So we not even washing them all until letting the mites build up so we can look for the variation in those. So we're crossing our fingers. We may see a big jump up this year. So it's tough to predict the future, but I do predict that someday Varroa will only be a minor problem, as it is in South Africa. And until then, please monitor and control Varroa for the benefit of everyone. Next management concept: understand how Varroa populations increase and decrease. If you have sealed brood in the hive, then mite reproduction is taking place. And on my Randy's Varroa model, which you can download, free download, you can look at this page on mite reproduction or mite increase, and you just type in the number here, how many months your colony has brood present. So this would be like Manitoba or someplace like that, and you get this expected exponential curve of mite increase due to reproduction. So you're going to go from 1 mite up to 50 mites, and then you have this slower decrease from natural mite mortality. But at the end of the year, you would still wind up with 20 mites for everyone you started with. So up in Canada, you could start a colony. You might be able to go for 3 years before the colony finally dies from Varroa mite. If, on the other hand, you have, well, let's go on here. Let's increase our months of brood right here. So there's 6 months of brood, and you can see your mite levels goes up a bit and then drops. If you got 8 months of brood rearing, it goes up a bit and it doesn't drop down as far. 10 months with brood, you have a problem, or in many areas of California or Florida, where you have 12 months of brood rearing, the mites just go exponential way too fast. So dependent upon, so you guys in New Mexico, those at higher elevation, your mite management will be much easier than for those at lower elevation. One of the issues with climate change is that our winters are getting colder, are warmer. So Noah, you can download these custom graphs on the internet. So I did it for the November through January period for California average temperature from 1895 to 2020. And I put the regression line in for my lifetime right here. And you can see our winters are getting much, much warmer. What that means is we have a shorter brood break, which means Varroa gets a head start. So anytime we have a very warm winter like this, you can expect the next year you're going to have a Varroa problem across the board. When you have a very cold winter, then Varroa is not going to be that big of a problem because they don't get that head start. Okay, next concept. Feel free to use my model to create your own mite management strategy. And you're going to choose your colony type right here, put in an arbitrary mite population to start with. 100 is usually a good number. Put your mite immigration level. If you're surrounded by a bunch of treatment-free beekeepers, you're going to be up maybe around a level 3 or 4. And this will give you the total immigration of mites in over the course of the season. And this is all controllable. And this also shows you the percent of mites that are in the brood at any time point. So what you can see is in the springtime, very large percentage of them are in the brood, up to nearly 80%. Most of the year, it's around that 50 to 60% level that are in the brood. And then you can start plugging in treatments. Just put in your mite reduction right here. Now, this could be your, I shouldn't say treatments, mite reductions is what you put in. So if you were able to go in there and pinch off and kill by hand 80% of the mites, that would be the same thing as putting in a treatment that would kill 80% of the mites. And there's a table on the same page that tells you what kind of treatment efficacy you can expect from different types of treatments. So I put in 2 low efficacy treatments at 80% and 85%, right, or 95% right here for higher efficacy. So with 2 treatments in this area, you have very good Varroa control. You never get up. This count of 5 is less than that 2% infestation level. Next concept. Again, the number of treatments per year is dependent upon the number of months that a colony is rearing brood, as you might expect from what I've just showed you. So here where we have a default colony in a temperate climate, 2 90% knockbacks of the mites may just barely be enough. If you're in a Mediterranean climate, you're gonna need at least 3 treatments, 3 90% reductions in the mite level to do it. And for us almond pollinators here in California, it requires a minimum of 4 treatments a year. We get by with a 50% treatment in July, but 90 to 95% reductions the rest of the time is able to do it. So the model allows you to figure out for your area what you're going to actually need. Okay, next concept. Understand Varroa reproductive biology and the rates of increase. That the reproductive cycle is 12 days inside the sealed brood cell from the time that the female mite enters. Did I say 12 days? Yeah, 12 days. She's going to enter, and by the time she and her offspring emerge is 12, slightly right around 12 days. But then she has this, what we call phoretic, but it's actually a dispersal period where she's out on the adult bees. She hops off the newly emerged bee and jumps onto a nurse bee, a bee that has fully developed fat bodies. So she can suck up those fat bodies, and the mite can suck up the fat bodies and develop her eggs. She also needs some time for the sperm to mature in her. Mite cannot reproduce immediately after insemination. The sperm has to mature inside her body. So the key thing is this dispersal phoretic period, which is about 5 days on average during the spring, and can be 20 to 25 days in the during the summer more typically. It's a shorter dispersal period when the colony is in swarm mode. So what I did here, I plotted out what your daily rate of increase of mites is, and over the course of a typical year. And you can see that in that April-May period is you have your fastest rate of increase per female mite. So this is really important to focus on spring management of Varroa, where it's many beekeepers wait until fall management. That's way too late. Focus on the spring management. And the reason for that is that you have your highest proportion of 8-day-old larvae that are day 8 after the egg is laid of bee larvae, which is when the mites can intervene or introduce into a cell relative to the amount of adult bees on the hive. So the mites have a much better success at entering a cell at that time when you have a very high larva to adult bee ratio. So what you want to do is to nip the infestation in the bud. And here what I'm showing is where you do a 95% knockback very early in the spring. Oh, hang on a second. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, Eric, I'm sorry, I'm on Zoom. We're good. Is he in good?
They're not going to the hospital.
Great. Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, so one reduction early in the season, you can see really helps to knock the mites back. And I like this quote from my buddy Russell Highcomb, Northern California queen producer. He says, "I'm not treating because I have high mite levels. I'm treating because I don't want high levels of mites." And that's the point to shift. Don't wait until mite levels get up there to treat. Be proactive and get them before they can go up there. The second thing is, different from the daily rate of increase is the absolute rate of increase, the total additional mites per hive per day, because that's a function of how many mites are already in the hive the day before. Okay, so you can see from this curve that the exponential increase is always the same. It just looks steeper based upon how much time there is, how many months the mites have been going, because that's a function that determines how many mites you're starting off with. So doubling from 1 mite to 2 is no big deal. Doubling from 1,000 mites to 2,000, which is exactly the same rate, is a big deal. So I plotted this out showing, let's just say you started the year with 150 mites, that would be this curve, compared to starting the year with only 10 mites. You notice with the 10 mites, the exponential increase curve are all the same, but you never get to be a problem because that won't show up till the next year. So by knocking it back really hard early in the season, they're not much of a problem for the rest of the season. Whereas if you start with a fairly high level, the absolute increase in mites in the hive increases tremendously. And yes, you can go from 150 mites to 10,000 mites over the course of a season. So the biggest mistake that beekeepers make is doing too little, too late. This beekeeper waited until mite levels were high, 95% reduction, too late. The viruses are already gone epidemic in the hive and the hive will crash. Whereas this one did a spring treatment and then a fall treatment. And notice this, we never get up to a high mite level anytime during the year. Okay, next concept. It's not only better, but it's easier to keep the mite levels low all season than to try to bring down a high mite level later on in the season. So here are 3 relatively low efficacy, only 80% reductions, 3 of them, again, keeping the mite level down nice and low. One other benefit is that if you're interested in honey production, what we find, and for me, monitoring mites in thousands of hives and doing thousands and thousands of mite washes, the one thing that really stands out is the colonies that have very low mite counts always outperform the colonies that have high mite counts. High mite counts slow it down. When you start getting above a mite wash of around 15 or so, the production of the colony really starts to drop off. Okay, that's biology. Let's move on to the physical and biotechnical methods. Okay, so Dee Lusby, Arizona beekeeper, at the same time that Africanized bees were invading Arizona, she noticed that her colonies that survived had small cells, and she really started this whole small cell following. I visited Dee and looked at them, and Dee never was willing to admit that she had Africanized bees. She called them small bees. Well, anybody who actually visited Dee would have said, yes, these are Africanized bees in your hives, and they have small cell because Africanized bees they build smaller cells. At the same time that I visited Dee, there are other beekeepers who had Africanized bees in large cell, and they had the same success that Dee had totally independent of cell size. So there's really, we look at all the evidence of controlled trials, small cell does not appear to help to control Varroa mites. Allowing colonies to swarm, it only reduces the mite population by about 30% and scatters those mites out in the landscape, leaving 70% of the mites in the parent colony. So you're not really getting a whole bunch of advantage by swarming. The bees in Arnav Forest that Tom Seeley worked with, those very tiny colonies that have restricted brood rearing that he experimented with, and I've gone over all of his data with a fine-tooth comb. If they were to swarm 3 times a year, which they tend to do in those small colonies, that can pretty much keep the mites in check. But these are non-productive, very small colonies. You give the colonies any space at all, and that doesn't work anymore. Screen bottom boards are open mesh floors. I was one of the first large adopters of these. We built 500 of them, installed them, and we're phasing them all out now. They're very useful. I use them if I want to get mite drops for scientific data. Very tedious to count and you have to come back twice, put them in and then take them back out. But as far as reducing mites, somebody said earlier today about the sticky boards stopping the mice that fall off from getting back on the bees. Well, you can do a very easy experiment. Don't take my word for it. Don't put any sticky on the board and put a ring of sticky around just the outside perimeter. If indeed those mice are ever going to get back on the bees, they'll all be stuck in the sticky on the outside perimeter. What you'll find is, no, they don't. They just, the only mice that ever drop are mice that are going to die of their own accord anyway. So sticky boards don't really seem to have that much benefit for mite management. Drone brood trapping, and Tina talked about this, that that may help a bit. You get maybe a 14% or so reduction. I'd be hesitant on scraping the drone brood, that you don't damage them. I cut them out completely, but if you just damage them, like with a capping scratcher, then if they have deforming virus titers, high deforming virus titers, then when the nurse bees come and clean their bodies out and eat them up, cannibalize them, they get a big blast of deforming virus, and this can be counterproductive. We've tried this in colonies, and it seems to just spread the virus in the hive. So if you're going to remove the drone brood, remove it completely and give it to your chickens, or very, very gently scratch the cappings, but don't damage the drone brood and leave it in the hive. Sugar dusting. I dusted over 500 pounds of powdered sugar doing testing for a number of years. And it can work, but you're going to have to dust at least twice a week and to reduce the mite levels at all, and at least once a week just to hold them steady. So most beekeepers tire of the sugar dusting fairly quickly. Thermal treatment. I recently published an article on the thermal treatment, and the problem I found was we got very poor mite kill in the sealed brood, and the mites were able to reproduce relatively rapidly after that thermal treatment. So it did not appear to sterilize the mites easy. So if you're interested in thermal treatment, read my recent articles on my website about this. It could be improved, but for most people, it's not really a viable solution right now. Okay, splitting. We do a ton of splitting. This is a major aspect of our mite management. And look for the article, Simple Early Treatment of Nukes, on my website. And it shows how to use an induced brood break and use queen cells to really control the mites on these splits by simply adding a little squirt of oxalic acid around day 18. Or you could use Apivar if you choose to do that. Either one of those would work fine when you make the split. But this takes us 5 seconds to do and costs us a few pennies. And it starts all of our colonies off almost mite free every spring. It's the most efficient thing we've done. We've done this now for well over a decade every year. And we really love this way of starting our hives off fresh and with new queens and mite free in the spring. Or if you're a recreational beekeeper with only a few hives, you can do something that they do in Europe by simply taking the hive apart and separating the combs of sealed brood from the combs of open brood. You can do a very simple division here, make 2 colonies, one of them with the original queen gets an oxalic acid treatment immediately. The other one, you wait 18 days for that. And now what you're going to have is 2 colonies, one with a new queen, both of them with almost no mites, and you can either recombine them and have a super strong honey producer, or you make up for losses, or you sell a queen. So this just takes a few minutes if you're handy moving combs around. By simply separating the sealed brood and the open brood and using the oxalic acid, you can control mites very, very easily early in the spring. Okay, Varroa concept. Never take your eyes off Varroa. Just imagine this is Varroa. You don't ever want to turn your back on Varroa, okay? And as Jennifer said, you really have to monitor Varroa. Oh, back to low system resources. Let's get to monitoring of the mites. Yes, like Jennifer said, visual inspection does not work. It's very rare to find a mite on the top of a bee. Most all the time, the mites will be down on the underside of the bee, especially on the left-hand side and underneath one of the front abdominal sternites. And by looking down this line, you can see what percent of the mites are normally in the brood. So you're going to have 80% of your mites in the brood in the spring. You're not, and most of the rest are going to be underneath the bee. So you're just not going to see them at all. You think you have no mites, but no, you have mites. They're just not there, easy to see. Many people wait until they see this. This is too late. The deforming virus epidemic is in full swing. This is way late to be dealing with the virus epidemic. Just like my son and his fiance, Eric, just came in and talked to me. They're in a trailer up here on the property, and they were very adverse to getting hesitant to get vaccinated for COVID. And I said, I'm going to tell you how it's going to turn out if you don't get vaccinated. And right now they're enjoying the experience of saying, okay, Dad, you can tell me you told us so, because they both have COVID right now and they are sicker than hell up there. Almost went to the hospital last night. Viruses don't care about your excuses or your politics or anything like that, or how you feel about Varroa treatment. Deformed wing virus will really take a colony out. Outside the hive, you may see crawlers where if a bee is emerging with deformed wings, the other bees shun it, kind of push it out of the hive, and you see them walking on the ground. So if you see bees with deformed wings, I can guarantee you have a mite problem in some of your hives. Once I was with a group of people, we went out on a field trip to a couple that claimed they had no Varroa in their hives. They're so proud of their bees, no Varroa. And as we approached their apiary, I looked down at the ground and I said, anybody want to bet any wagers right now? You see these bees with no wings walking around on the ground? I said, we're going to see Varroa, I guarantee you. Sticky board counts is one way of monitoring. They give a rough estimate, but it has to be adjusted to the size of the cluster of bees. And it's mainly dependent upon how many pupae or adult bees are emerging from the brood that day. So, and the counts can vary by a huge factor day by day. So I find them pretty erratic and very time consuming. The sugar shake, fairly easy. And even with a hard shake, you don't tend to kill any bees. But as Jennifer was saying, look at my data on my website where I compared the mite recovery percentage of mites recovered versus a gentle shake and a really hard shake. Even with a hard shake, I only got 2 samples out of 10 where I recovered 95% or more of the mites. I got as little as 50% of the mites recovered, even with a super, super hard shake for a full 60 seconds. And I'll tell you right now, if you're not using a stopwatch, you have no idea how long it is to shake hard for 60 seconds on a sample. So if you're planning on doing more than 2 a day, you're dreaming that you're going to do a full 60-second shake. So much quicker and more accurate is to scoop up a level half cup of young bees, shake them in a tub, let the old bees fly off. And I got a lot of information on my website of which comb. We do not take a comb with open larvae. We look for a comb just outside the brood nest. That minimizes your chance of disturbing a queen and gives a more representative mite count for the hive. If you take a mite count with bees from a frame with open brood, it can be 3 times as high as one taken from another comb in the colony. And then we use color-coded cups to keep track of these, and we do rapid fire mite washing. At home, 2 solo cups, a piece of tulle fabric. You cut the bottom 3/4 inch off of one cut, nest it inside the other one, and you don't do any shaking. You do a swirl with the Dawn detergent, and you get very, very rapid mite recovery. Even before you even swirl it, most of the mites will drop off of their own accord and go to the bottom. Then just a short, gentle swirl, and you'll have all the mites down at the bottom. We really have loved Dawn. We've gone switched over to it. And I have a holder here that we drop the cup into, pull the bees out, and then look from the underside with a magnifying mirror. And it's very easy to look at the mites. And yeah, Stephen, we do intentionally run lots of colonies with high mite counts to be able to do our test for efficacy. Our record last year was 350 mites in a half cup of bees. That's 300 bees carrying 350 mites.
Wow.
So more than one mite per bee.
That's amazing.
It was actually my assistant who was counting it says, holy crap, I can't count this. I said, okay, let's just split it up into several cups and we'll count them 1 cup at a time. Yeah, absolutely amazing. That colony did not live, obviously. And here's a setup that we use with the stand, the magnifying glass. And actually, this was the assistant Tom right here. And we're keeping track of all of our mite counts for each yard. So bam, bam, bam. We do lots and lots of mite washes. We don't ever want to see, here's our, what we use in our operation. We don't want to see more than 1 or 2 in the mites in a wash in the springtime. And we let it go up to a maximum of 6 during the summertime. So this is the figure you often see cited, that 2% infestation. We don't want to see a 2% infestation early in the season. If we see 1 or 2 mites, that's a 1/3% infestation we get on them. Next concept, late season mite drift can hurt you. This is actual data of a semi-weekly sticky board counts of drifted mites coming in. We eliminate all the mites from the hive with a combination of synthetic miticides, and then any mice, there's no more mice dropping. We take it down to 0 drop, none left reproducing in the hive. Then any mice that come in get immediately poisoned and drop off. So these are, so this is showing right here where we're getting, if you're getting 40 mites coming in twice a week, that's 80 mites a week coming into that hive. This colony right here had a cumulative total between the middle of September and pretty much by early November of 500 mites coming into the hive. I imagine some years, I don't have the hard data, this would probably figure it might be like 2,000 mites coming into the hive. Huge immigration of mites coming in from outside. And if you have my model where you can change your immigration level from 0 to 2, so instead of 0 mites coming in to 500 mites coming in, which is a very real figure, your treatment would be enough if you had no immigration. But if you have immigration coming in, that colony would crash. So it can make a difference in your mite level. In the Bay Area, San Francisco, where you have a ton of, you have like 5 treatment-free beekeepers in every block, those who are actually treating their hives and monitoring just say, Randy, it's just impossible. The amount of mite drift coming in, we're having to do something with our hives treatment almost every week during the late season because of the immense mite drift coming in. Monitor the mite levels in June in order to identify any mite disseminators. I'm using this term rather than mite bombs because I have some unpublished data that shows there's no such thing as a mite bomb, unless you live in an area where your colonies get robbed upon collapse. If you live in a Mediterranean climate, no robbing takes place at colony collapse, unless there's a nectar flow on or just winding down when colonies collapse, they don't get robbed out. So we did this, this is one of the first ones we did in 2015 in September, looking at our colonies after doing treatments in both June and August. And this is the histogram of mite levels. So this is the number of hives out of those 203 hives that over 100 of them had a mite count between 0 and 5. We're happy with that. We're even happy at September with a mite count of 10 because they're going to get an oxalic acid treatment coming up. So most all the hives were in this low mite area. But look at these guys out here. This is up to 100 mites in a mite wash. You have these outliers. We find about 10% of our hives are these outliers. And when I do the math, I found out that 25% of the hives, this 25% of our colonies, contains 75% of the mites in the entire operation. These other 75% of our hives only contain 25% of the mites. So these mite disseminators are a huge problem of just constantly disseminating mites back to your mite controlled hives. Now, these may be your neighbors, these may be feral colonies in the neighborhood, or maybe your outliers, your 5 to 10% that just have these super high mite levels. So the more monitoring you do, the better you can detect these and then eliminate these. We usually hit them with a really hard formic acid treatment, which contrary to something I heard earlier today, does not kill the brood, other than the open young larvae, and cleans them up, and those bees can recover then. Okay, let's move on to treatments in case you need to use them. And here is a picture of a puppy with a mite infestation. And they call it a mange. And imagine this puppy that the owner puts a leash on the puppy and said, let's go out for a walk. And just before they go outside, this owner proudly puts on her I'm a treatment-free puppy keeper t-shirt and goes walking out in the street, dragging this poor infested puppy along. What would the other dog owners think of this proud treatment-free puppy keeper? That's what you are if you're not controlling mice in your own hive. Same analogy right there. Any grower that doesn't manage their pests, if this was an apple grower and they said, I'm going to be a treatment-free apple grower, the other neighbors, I guarantee you, will have a discussion with this apple grower because his orchard then becomes a nuisance to everybody else. I have hard data, I haven't published yet, showing that mites drift to a large extent for a full half mile away to other apiaries from infested hives in an apiary. The other thing is that those who think they are doing benefiting the bee population by allowing colonies to die, it never helps to let a colony die. The selective breeding is done at the queen level. There's no reason to let the whole colony collapse because that just eliminates your potential breeding stock for starting nukes for more queens the next spring. You got to you sacrifice the queen, not all the bees in the hive. So if the mite level starts to go up, you don't have to punish the colony. Give them a formic acid treatment, clean them up, kill the queen, and put in give them a chance with a new queen. Many people use treatment-free as an excuse for neglectful beekeeping. I don't buy it. Control Varroa for the benefit of everyone. Next Varroa concept, understand the limitations of and best windows for each treatment option. This is on my first year beekeeping, and there's only 2 that you can use when there's honey on the hive. So one possibility is synthetic miticides. Currently, the apivar strips work in most cases, but not all. Mites are rapidly developing resistance, especially of the commercial stocks. Apistan, which failed for many years, now is also an option. There's an adverse effect on the mites, a fitness effect from the fluvalinate. So if you don't apply it for a few years, the mites, resistant mites disappear and you get susceptible mites come back in. So you could use apistan now or the apivar. The disadvantages are fairly expensive. Take up to 4 strips with apivar. It's not a rapid knockdown and losing the efficacy. Also, the residues in the combs. I didn't put that down there. So in our operation, our commercial operation, we have not used a synthetic miticide since the year 2001. We've been essentially organic since 2001. And yeah, it takes about 8 weeks for apistan to have full efficacy. So it's better to be used as an early season treatment rather than a late season treatment. Hops beta acids, HopGuard. It's very effective when there's no brood. Otherwise, you have to repeat the applications. And I am currently running a trial in conjunction with the manufacturer to figure out how often to repeat the applications when there's brood in the hive. And I will be collecting final data on Tuesday on that, and I will publish the results of that to see. I'm testing repeating at 7 days versus repeating at 14 days. So we'll see which is more efficacious. Essential oils. Human beings love essential oils. Oh, they smell good. We put them in our baths and stuff. The next thing they want to do is they want to dump them in their beehives. There's a reason why plants produce essential oils, and generally it is to repel or poison herbivores, predators. in general, bees hate essential oils. And people who are just dumping all the essential oils in their hives, they're not doing their bees a favor at all. We don't put any of that junk into our hives. If we do want to use an essential oil, the best proven is thymol. We do use thymol every year, and the bees hate it, but it really knocks the mites back. But we only use it short term and get it the heck out of the hive so the bees can recover from the thymol. Thymol comes in the form of Apigard, Thymovar up in Canada, Apolife Avar, which has a bunch of other stuff in it, eucalyptus oil that the bees really hate, or homemade solutions. We use the Apigard with great success. Put it into a 1.5 inch rim. We do the 250 gram doses, just following manufacturer's recommendations. Hot weather, 100-degree weather, we don't have a problem. We apply it in mid-August. You guys would apply it a little bit earlier up there in New Mexico. But you want to, as who was it? Tina, I think, said earlier, you want to do it in time for after this treatment for the bees then to build up their winter bees. I'm going to skip this one. My studies this spring didn't support that. Organic acids, there's two kinds. Formic acid vaporizes and is the only miticide that penetrates the cappings and can kill all the mites in the brood if you put it on heavy enough and are willing to kill the queen. Then oxalic acid, normally non-vaporizing unless you heat it up. Formic acid, very natural, put off by ants, our carpenter ants here. If you take one whiff of them, your eyes will water up and your lungs will stop breathing. You will feel that formic acid. It does indeed kill the mites in the brood. We count the dead mites after treatment. And it gives colonies a fresh start. They always come back with a very nice brood pattern after a formic acid treatment. Two ways of putting the Formic Pro on: one strip repeated at 10 days or 2 strips applied at once. In hot weather, I would suggest the 1 strip repeated, much less queenlessness. You're still going to lose queens, but in general, the colonies will requeen themselves and have a new laying queen on their own. Not necessarily so with the 2 strips at once if the weather is hot. If the weather is cooler, then either method. There's a 2 and going in at once. There's plenty of unapproved alternative application methods for formic acid. I'm not at liberty to discuss them, but there's formic it's a touchy thing to use. If you're not really good at handling chemicals, stick with the Formic Pro strips, which are very safe for the applicator to apply. Otherwise, it can be very dangerous to apply. The downside, you can supersede queens, especially older queens. So one option for the hobbyist: grab the queen, put her in a cage, put her in a separate nuke, or take her into the house and keep her inside for a couple of days until the formic vapors, the first burst of vapors has passed, and then it's safe to put the queen back into the colony. And I'm not convinced that the formic acid that even kills the queens. I'm not sure whether it just triggers the bees to kill their own queen. So we need more research on that, but you can easily just remove the queen and then blast them really hard and then put the queen back in. The big advantage of formic acid, there are 0 residues. It's totally natural product, natural component of honey and in the hive, and no residues at all. So we like that a lot about formic. It has issues with just the handling. Here's my grandson sucking on buttercup oxalis, as most of us Californians do, which is the sap is a solution of oxalic acid dissolved in sugar solution. The same thing you're going to put onto the beehive. What it does, it gives minor brain damage to humans, and that's why we Californians are all so weird, because we all grow up sucking on we call it sour grass. And here we are dribbling it onto a hive, 5 milliliters per bee space. Commercially, we don't use a syringe. We use a garden sprayer set at a gentle stream. If you just Google oxalic acid treatment table, this table will come right up on your computer and show you how to mix any dose of the strong strength down to the weak. We use the medium concentration for ourselves. If you have a longer winter, you might want to use the weaker one there. Here we are, applying it with a garden spray, just a gentle stream, calibrated very carefully. So we apply 5 milliliters per second. So that means if you have 8 frames down here and you have 7 frames up here, let me help you beekeepers with the math. 8 and 7 is 15. It takes 15 seconds to treat this hive. 2 of us will routinely treat 400 hives a day, driving from yard to yard to yard. So there's, we really like the oxalic acid dribble used when the colonies are broodless. Here's Eric again. My son's going through yards, winter cluster right there, hitting him with oxalic acid. The bees, both in the bottom seams and the top seams. You can, in Europe now, as the synthetic miticides fail, there are now, many beekeepers are creating induced brood breaks using special queen cages. And then using oxalic acid with great success. Another thing you do is we use these excluder frames I make out of plywood with a piece of queen excluder in here. So a division board, and we use them in our queen ring a lot. But if you insert one here and put a frame of brood right here and put the queen right there, you have now trapped the queen onto one comb. You can cover this with either a lid or a queen excluder, and she is trapped on that one comb. She'll stay in there all summer long if you trap her on that one comb. Anyway, you confine her for 2 weeks, and that gives you the ability to do full mite control. What you do is you confine her for 2 weeks, you release her after 2 weeks, and then on day 21, on the 3rd week, now you have this treatment window where the colony is totally no sealed brood, so you can hit all the kill most all the mites with an oxalic acid dribble. But you can only have to trap the queen for 2 weeks. Let me see if I have a, yeah, okay. So there's the oxalic acid dribble, and I think I have this one up on my beginners also. So if you're going to do it on a Saturday, the next 2 Saturdays later, you release the queen, and then on the 3rd Saturday, you remove that trap frame, which will have any of the mites in the brood on that one trap frame, and then dribble the colony with oxalic acid. There's no place else in the hive for a mite to hide. Oxalic acid vaporization, very popular in some areas. My crew hates it. they are amazed that anybody would even use this, because compared to the dribble, it's more expensive, it takes longer, and it's way more dangerous than the dribble to apply. But I know a lot of beekeepers use this. It's not approved for use yet. Well, honey supers are on, but it will be one of these days, I'm sure, because it doesn't get into the honey. It doesn't have a high efficacy. This is 10 vaporizations right here to drop down the mite level to a low level from experiments that I did. That's a lot of labor going back and vaporizing a hive that many times. It takes vaporizations roughly every 4 days for at least 5 times to really get mite levels down. These were 10 days apart. One of the things that has great promise is this extended release oxalic acid, based upon research by Mite and group from Argentina, where they use cardboard strips. Very popular in New Zealand now with cardboard strips. I've been experimenting with various matrices. The best we've found so far are these Swedish sponges. I'm currently testing. In fact, I just took final data on testing a number of other substrates. I do have a pesticide research authorization, so I'm not suggesting that anybody else use this method. And this could very well work into our rotational program. Results, I can tell you preliminary results right now. We're finding out of these, the optimal treatment, which we tried cutting the sponges into 4 strips and applied either 1, 2, or 3 strips to hives. And we found out it takes really a minimum of the 3/4 strips to get decent efficacy in the hives. And we also found out it works well as an overwinter treatment too. So tremendously promising. And the last thing in Varroa management is to rotate treatments. The only way to halt development of resistance is by interrupting its use in a control strategy. So you want to do some kind of rotation. We don't have amitraz in ours, but we will continue to use rotation here just because we don't ever want the mite to develop resistance to oxalic. It's going to be very difficult for them to do it, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't do it. So I want to hit them from, throw punches from different directions. This is, again, what we do in our operation, proven, works really, really well. What we'll probably start doing is replacing this dribble with an oxalic acid extended release here, and then maybe do another one right about here. So maybe twice a year, we might just do that with a time off for a cleanup.
Hey, Randy, so
Yeah.
Just to let you know, you've got about, well, let's see, 13 minutes left, but you do have a whole bunch of questions. So we want to make sure we have time to get.
Okay, let's see.
Thanks.
So use my Varroa model, punch in whatever treatments you want, see what works. You can kill 1,000, or not 1,000, you can kill 100 hives a night with simulations, and it doesn't cost you anything. And you don't kill any bees. This table is in that model. It shows what kind of efficacy you can expect from different kinds of treatments: drone cone removal, swarm, induced brood break, walk-away split. So I've already calculated out what kind of efficacies you can come up with. And your last treatment concept, if you control Varroa and provide good nutrition, most of your beekeeping problems just disappear. And that's back to here. And there's our timing.
That's awesome. Perfect timing. So we do have quite a few questions, Randy. So let's see. Amy Owen wants to know, why do you prefer Dawn over alcohol for washes?
Boy, I read it extensively, but what it is, first, it's way cheaper. Two, it takes much less agitation. The mites drop off better than they do with the alcohol. If you do use alcohol, don't use 70%, use 91%. 91% gets you much better mite recovery than 70%. And Amy, there's a ton of data on my website published recently where I've gone over all these solutions to compare them.
So Randy, I actually made up a gallon of Dawn dish detergent and was waiting to use it. And then I became suddenly really worried about the foaming because it's a soap mixture. And I know
it's not
you
soap,
said
it's a detergent.
Well, but I mean, it does foam. And
it does foam, it's a surfactant.
So you said, and surfactant's good. It washes off the mites.
No. That's not why it's good.
Okay. Well, I was worried about the foam, the mites sort of floating up into the foam and not falling down.
You're spending too much time worrying and not enough time looking.
Well, I know you said don't shake, but swirl. So it's kind of like a martini.
No, when you shake, what's your end result? When you're doing the agitation, where do you want the mice to wind up? Where do you want them to wind up?
To fall down.
To fall down. So if you shake up and down, what happens?
I was just worried that they would.
No, I'm just telling you, I'm asking you a question. If you shake up and down, where do the mites go?
I don't know.
Down. They never fall down.
Okay. So that's why you swirl.
That's why you swirl.
Okay.
Why add vertical motion of the mice if you want them to go down?
No, okay, I get it.
Okay, and then with the Dawn detergent, the agitation is almost eliminated. The mites, with alcohol, you need agitation. With the Dawn, you need very little agitation. And it's not from them washing them off. It has to do apparently with affecting the surfactant quality of the surface tension of the tracheal, the spiracles of the mites, is my guess.
Okay, great. Let's see. Anita has a question. Randy, I tested in the spring and had very low mite counts. Then my queens crashed in 2 of my hives, so they were queenless for almost 2 months. I also split the strong hives and they created new queens. So are you suggesting treating even with low mite levels? I'm getting ready to test and treat this week, and I'm a little worried after listening to your presentation that I should have been testing all summer long. I figured the mechanical control methods would have kept the mites low. And she says, any thoughts? I'm sure you have a few thoughts.
Yeah. If you don't actually take a look, you have no idea. Now, if you were to go out year after year and do it over and over again, then you get an idea of what you can expect. But when you assume it's, yeah, you can make an ass out of yourself. Yes. I wouldn't assume anything. We found out, and this same thing with it. It's so easy to talk yourself into, oh, this for sure has got to be, just like, you know, you have it in your mind, just thinking that it was the foaming action that made a difference. Okay, that's just you convince yourself of something. You got to go by hard data. Hard data is actually going out into yards and looking at what we're seeing is we have 60 yards of bees. We go out, we might wash every yard, and once a year we might wash every damn colony. There are huge yards to yard differences, and there's huge colony to colony differences. So you can't assume anything unless you're actually out there looking.
Okay, great. Laura Risk has a question. I have a neighbor 1 mile away, 15 colonies, not monitoring. I've been doing soap wash once a month, 0 to 3 mites per colony of her 9 colonies in her yard. Going into fall, should I increase my monitoring?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And here's the problem is some colonies are mite magnets or bee magnets. And you can have 2 colonies sitting side by side. One will have 500 mites coming in and one will have 10 mites coming in. So you can't, and this is the problem. I wish I could tell you, you could say, oh, I'll just, go out and monitor 2% of my hives or 5% of my hives. You'll learn nothing, almost nothing by that low level monitoring.
Well, certainly if you can do 1,500 hives, we can do our 6 to 10 hives. Let's see, Randy Schwartz wants to know, do you have any experience using the Liebig formic acid dispenser for Varroa treatment? It's a formic acid dispenser developed by German bee researcher Dr. Liebig for providing a hive with a known amount of formic acid during summer Varroa treatment.
We have been making similar ones ourselves. I have been yet be able to find a source for getting one of those. I've used the Nasenheider one, but the Liebig looks very promising, and I would love to get my hands on one.
Great. We had 2 questions just to remind us, what is your water to dawn formula?
1 tablespoon of Dawn to a half gallon of water. 1 tablespoon to a half gallon. And you have some range on that. If you drop down to half that amount, your efficacy drops off. If you go over that, it just makes it unnecessarily slippery.
Great. Edmund Shell asks, can you use the OA Dribble to knock down mites until a cool period when you can use Formic Pro?
Yeah, and I need to collect more data on that. There's conflicting data on how much harm that does to hives, where some like EHS group out of Spain says it causes harm. We don't notice that in ours, but that's experiment I've been wanting to run. Somebody wants to collect data and collaborate in an experiment, I would love to give you a protocol.
That's excellent. Okay, Daniel Borneo wants to know, does the distance between hives have any effect on mite population?
Yeah, the more hives you have in one area, that you're going to expect to have higher mite counts overall from that dissemination. It's like diffusion. If you have a high concentration in one part, they just diffuse all the time. You got to realize when colonies are close, there's a tremendous amount of drifting of young bees. And unfortunately, the young bees are the ones that carry the most mites. So it's not old bees that drift, it's the young bees on their first flights that take off. And those are the bees that are most attracted to Varroa mites. So that's why you have this drift of young bees. Some research out of Germany some years ago found we're in a crowded apiary, you can have 40% of the bees in a hive were not born in that hive. 40% were not born in that hive.
Wow.
Yes, there's major drifting.
Okay, Amy Owen has a question. How hot is too hot for Formic Pro strips? How far would you push it? I know manufacturers recommend 85 degrees, which doesn't give us a very big treatment window here in New Mexico.
I'll go to my website, read the summer treatments one, just about 3 articles back, and I have all the data of when we did it in 100-degree weather and compare the 2 treatments, and that describes it in detail what we saw. Yes, quite a few queens were superseded, but with the repeated treatment, very few were not queen right at 42 days at 2 brood cycles afterwards. So they had replaced their queen successfully.
Great. Ann Atkinson wants to know, can you use the Dawn solution in the Veto Pharma container?
Yeah, I'm not too crazy about the Veto Pharma. They approached me when they were first designing that, and I sent them some. Told them how to do it. And they sent me some prototypes, and I think they really blew it on the design. But yes, you could use it in there, but do a swirl, not a shake.
I actually use that container myself. So can you help me out and tell me why I should? I mean, it wasn't expensive and it just seemed like it was an all-in-one. Obviously, the ones that you've created are effective. What would you say are the issues with the Varroa Mite check container?
One, it's
Veto.
awkward to hold in your hand. It's too big a diameter. And
Yeah.
number two, the perforations. I don't know why they made the perforations so small in the container. So
Yeah.
mainly it's a issue of size and hole size in the basket.
Okay, great. Amy also asked, to determine mite recovered by sugar shake, did you do an alcohol wash afterwards to get any remaining mites off?
Yeah, that's how we calculated efficacy.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. Amy's also wants to know, why do mites prefer the left side of the bee?
That's a great question. I've never, ever heard anybody come up with an answer, but a lot of scientists have asked that question.
Okay, I'm going to give you one more from Amy. She may win the award for the most questions during the day.
Okay.
I'm not keeping track, but she's up to maybe 20.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Amy. She says,
Wait,
I
think you should give her some pre-bee sting therapy as a reward.
Well, she's one of our most enthusiastic and most wonderful beekeepers here in Albuquerque. And
Wonderful.
She's got a business. Yeah, yeah. She's got a question. She says, I love your model for a treatment tool. Thanks for providing that. Do you input Varroa levels at various times of the year? She said, I don't like to treat if I don't need to. Some of my hives have consistently only needed one treatment in the spring. It's been very exciting.
Yeah, what you can do is the way you work that model, you adjust your starting mite count to make when you do an actual mite wash that it comes up with that number. And then that sets the model for that starting at that time. You just dummy up the figure starting mite count until it comes up. So it's based upon everything in that model is based upon an actual observed mite wash count.
Awesome. Okay, one last question. Laura Risk wants to know, could you explain or show a picture of the term bald brood? I haven't heard this term before. Thanks so much for all the research you do.
Oh yeah, that was let me just go right down current slide, and I'm going to go up. I should start from the beginning.
No.
Let's see, bald brood. It was fairly early on. Oh yeah, I started from the wrong side.
That's okay.
We're getting close.
No, it's all right.
Where was I? I just passed it, I think here. There we go. There's bald brood. So you can see right here, they've chewed the cappings off the heads of these wide-eyed and purple-eyed pupae, but they have not removed them. This is different. Here's Varroa sensitive hygiene right up here. You can see where they've started to chew one out. And it's not Varroa sensitive hygiene, they're chewed out, they're white, they're not gray, which means that they didn't die first. It's the bees that chewed them out. If they were gray, melanization has occurred and they're chewing out one that already died. Here, they're not chewing them out. They're simply uncapping them, and they will recap them afterwards. And the only way you can tell is by dissecting off the capping, turning it over and looking at the underside to see whether the silk has been chewed away and then put back in.
All right, excellent. Thanks for pulling that picture back up.
You bet.
Well, listen, I just wanted to doubly thank you. You're a gentleman, you're a scientist, you're a wonderful beekeeper, you're a good son to your mom, and you're a wonderful, wonderful dad to your kids and your grandchildren. You inspire us all, and it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
You bet. And happy beekeeping to everybody. I wish you all the best of success.
Thank you. We'll see you again soon.
Okay.